Yaniki coming at you again with another chapter deconstruction, starting with chapter 241 of My Hero Academia. We are officially out of villain season. It's back to school. I think that's appropriate. It's the first day of September. This is the day that the first chapter of the Viz released. So at least for the US, this is basically officially everybody's going back to school time. I dig it. Classy. So we find out that after the incident taking place before, the Deka City incident, where Bakugo and Shoto stopped the guy who had the seltzer gauntlets. If you remember back to the chapter Go Go Sliding Go, chapter 219, is when that happened. So, they took out a villain, and of course, they ended up being interviewed about the fact that, hey, it was 30 minutes in. The reality is the son of Endeavor, the kid from the sludge villain incident, the kid from the Kamino incident, the kid who won the sports festival. Both of these guys got their heroes licenses 30 minutes later, boom, saving people, living up to the already established hype that they both kind of have, even though, due to Bakugo's rude boy nature, he was actually cut from the entire segment on as far as airtime went. So much so that his fellow classmates, which this is stuff that I love to see, watched the videos and felt like they could make fun of him for it, which was adequate. And you see Ochako looking kind of like stunned at how much they really edited out of it for him. And of course, I just want to point out that this entire chapter is kind of an oblivious fest for Shoto. And I kind of love it because it's important to see these characters beyond just, their power levels or the way they fight, but also in the way they interact with each other and the way they interact with people as a whole. And so what you have here, this is actually a chapter that is very well balanced and structured around the big three, which I'll be covering why this matters at the end of the chapter discussion. But we see more discussion of, man, they really need to work on how they get in the media. You've got Deku mouthing off about how Bakugo isn't very much like All Might, and so we've gotten to a point now in their dynamic where they can actually like riff on each other, and it's not just a one-way street. They now make fun of each other, again symbolizing the progression of them as rivals, but also as, like, to a certain degree, friends. Though Bakugo still is adamantly not Shoto's friend, as he made very clear in the beginning. So the thing that I really like about this, though, is that people have not become anti-hero. This is something that I talked about, how the MLA's goal of getting people to feel like liberation was the right way to go, no matter who won the previous arc. This is the direction society would trend towards, especially with things getting more dangerous. The sheer instability caused by the fall of All Might has already made people think that defending themselves might be an appropriate measure, but there's no reason to target heroes who are already on the front lines doing everything they can. Furthermore, people talk about the fact that there's bureaucratic work involved to being a pro hero, talking about filing paperwork and things like that before they can go ahead and launch their assaults or whatever. So they're saying that giving people the right to defend themselves might be the optimal move here, utilizing their quirks instead of just relying on heroes, but they should still have heroes. That's something that I think is very interesting, is that society has not become anti-hero, but rather, thanks to the words of Can't You See-kun, an internet meme, but also an actual influence. That's the beauty of the society of which Horikoshi is building here. A lot of people will say that this does not have world building, and the problem is that a lot of the ways that it's illustrated is Horikoshi affirming for us that the world functions very much like our own, and because of that we take it for granted and just see it as another similarity. But the fact that internet culture is still persevered through the era and the advent of quirks and all that other aspects is kind of phenomenal, but also shows the indomitable will of memes and the human spirit. So that being said, Mount Lady kind of addresses the fact that, they do, even though they're supporting the heroes, it's because of the fact that they feel like they are inadequate that they're backing them up. It's more like they feel like they need to encourage the heroes, and the citizens themselves feel like a stopgap. So they need to not view this as them being off the hook, but rather them needing to make sure they make strides to validate these people's opinions, to make sure that it doesn't shift too far into like a chaotic anarchist society in which the quirks will be liberated. But at the same time, we all know that not every quirk needs to be liberated. Look, if you read My Hero Academia Vigilantes, the Crawler, his quirk being unlimited, whatever, the dude's a car that can go up buildings and kind of fly. Highly recommend you read My Hero Academia Vigilantes. It's phenomenal. It actually shows, it's another one of those ones that kind of focuses on repression and how that can affect the perception of your quirk and how to utilize it. But anyway, back to this. So seeing that, like, they're actually doing media training now, which is something that you would think that they, and the reason why this is being saved until the end of the year, and yes, we are a couple days from the end of the school year. Officially, this is stated directly at the beginning of the chapter. The reason for this is that before you even had a provisional license, you needed to know how to save people, to do all the things that actually matter, and now you need to hit the cream of the crop, top, like, last piece of what it means to cover all the basics of being a hero within this society, and that's media training. Furthermore, this is something that can carry over into this arc because of what's said at the end of it. Now, as they go through the interview cycle, we start off with Shoto, who's finally named his ice move. That was something that was very noticeable, is that when we were discussing the characters and the move sets that they had, Bakugo had AP Shot, Exploder Pelt, Stun Grenade, 0-point Stun Grenade, Howitzer Impact, like all these different moves that he had already named. Deku has all his different smashes: Manchester Smash, St. Louis Smash, Delaware Smash, Air Force. He uses the Detroit Smash. So he's got these moves ready to go. Whereas Shoto, he finally named the Flash Freeze Heat Wave, and then he finally named the Ice Attack Heaven Piercing Ice Wall, which is a little pretentious, but I kind of love it. Like, Shoto, like, it's like, well, it goes all the way up to the skies. Boom. And he goes on to talk about the utility of it, and we get one of those weird, like, old ladies lusting after young boys moments with Mount Lady, talking about how he's cute and she wants him, even in the viz that carries over. But the thing that I love is that we once again get a case of how Shoto is just kind of socially inept, which is a normal byproduct of the kind of childhood he had, and it's kind of nice to see, like, a series tackling that and, like, making it a bit more obvious when he, like, misses jokes so regularly, or when she says he'll be a lady killer, he's like, oh no, women will die, and you kind of have to go, like, oh man. And that's kind of like not having his older brothers around to talk to him about girls at all, not being able to talk to his dad about any of that other stuff. I doubt Fuyumi was focused on the birds and the bees at all when, like, teaching Shoto, and in general, him bouncing back from all these, like, depression, all this abuse, all these, moments where he's been worried about his family and all these other psychological stressors. He's been so focused on being a hero despite his dad that he hasn't been paying attention on, like, all the ways that people interact with each other necessarily. And so in that regard, Shoto is, again, more like a typical shonen protagonist than Deku is, because Shoto is just actually just kind of aloof to how, like, women perceive him to a certain degree. And so they go on to talk about the fact that ultimate moves are more than just, the way they beat people, which they kind of talked about even when they first started. If you remember when they said create those special moves, they wanted to make sure they had something that people could identify with them, a way that they could defeat villains, something that seemed confident, powerful. Basically, your super moves are a part of your branding, and that's what they want. Your combat and your, like, what you're doing on the field in combat and who you are as a person, you want to make sure you bring all those to the table and present that to people, and that super moves and their names reflect that about you. Now, as you go, we go through, like, the rest of the class, and just like when we had to, like, select hero names, we get to see, Ida, he's talking about Ingenium and how he's trying to inherit that mantle. We get Momo talking about how she's got a profound knowledge base, which is important to note that, as Shoto said he hoped, she did not let her confidence waver, further solidifying that her progression and her ability to understand that just because she loses doesn't mean she's inferior or lacking of intelligence or anything like that has persisted. She has officially moved past that psychological hurdle. That's, the character development that you need. You get more jokes with, the way Uraraka is referred to and everybody's. Now, Kaminari makes a little L, and something that I want to talk about is that just because he made that L does not mean that he's with the Meta Liberation Army. In fact, there's actually no reason for him to technically know they exist. And the Meta Liberation, being a traitor for the Meta Liberation Army the entire time would not make him a traitor with the League of Villains the entire time. So it's important to note that this is more than likely just him doing his gun, because, like, when he does the in the provisional license arc, you see him shoot, and it's like a sharp shooting of lightning or whatever. And so you got to remember that he uses the right-hand rule of electromagnetism when he, like, fires his lightning. So you don't need to, like, look at that and think, okay, yeah, that's automatically Meta Liberation Army. Though and my personal opinion is that the Kaminari Trader stuff is a bit of a red herring, and I think this is more of him being like a meme lord, especially with the way that the Stain commentary earlier in the series as a way to deflect readers off of who the actual traitor is, which is Aoyama, whose line will be, "Even in my darkest moments, I cannot stop twinkling." I promise you. Okay, I don't actually promise you, but I wanted to say that. So, one of the things I like is that even though Bakugo is told that his "I'm not going to waste time with sound bites and just like shut up and I got this" is a bad approach, it's important to note that Mirako is the number 5 hero, and that's basically the attitude that she was bringing to the table. So it's not necessarily hopeless for Bakugo that he'll be considered unpalatable, especially because of the fact that he's already got so much legacy that regardless, people are always going to have their eyes on his career, especially once, you know, this arc keeps going. But what's a critical moment, Deku. Deku, while being an extremely like uncomfortable and still like an anxious, jittery person because he hasn't done like a lot of interviews, which is kind of weird to think about because after the overhaul incident, people directly stated, "Oh, Deku's the reason why we didn't get so much damage. Deku is, you know, he did a really good job taking down overhaul." You would think that on some level, like somebody would have gone back and tried to talk to the kid about, you know, taking down a Yakuza boss, even though technically Eri is the one who takes him down. But the reality is that Deku put them hands on that boy, and you would think that, like, because it was known amongst the people who did the operation, that he would have at least a little bit of experience and get to talk, you know, about that and have some practice with this. But I guess that's not how that went down. So Midnight brings up, though, you know, his powers, which is interesting because she brought that up even though that was kind of unrelated. But one of the things is that, as they mentioned earlier, is that like being able to be in the media is being able to reassure people. And if a hero that you were trusting to save you had his powers short circuit or malfunction the way that Deku's did, that would definitely be alarming for you. And if that happened on camera while he was doing a rescue, that would disturb people going forward in the future. And so we get Deku explaining that, one, it's been 2 weeks since the manifestation of Black Whip, but two, that it's his own psyche that was like keeping him from being able to use it, but that he'll also be able to, as he practices with it, get better at dialing the percentages correctly and utilizing the power, as we see that he manages to get a small bit of shot of the Black Whip out, which comes out of his the knuckles on his gloves, and those have been there since before, and we know that there's a funnel that comes off the wrist guard when he does his flicks to help him concentrate the air pressure better. So that kind of means that even back then Horikoshi kind of already had this planned out, which I personally, like I've told people before, I always thought One For All was going to function the way it was revealed to function, and I always thought the way it had been utilized was odd, because mathematically speaking, no, even with 8 buff dudes in a row, you would not be able to punch hurricanes. So I thought something was odd about that always. So there was always going to, like, to me, there's always been more to the quirk, and I think that Horikoshi, you could argue, I wouldn't definitely say it, that might have been foreshadowing that there were more things to come. And so the idea of Deku, one, it looks like he's using full cowling while utilizing Black Whip, which is especially going to be useful, because that means, because it didn't look like that when he did it during the exam joint training arc, actually. If you go back and you see when he does it against Shinso, the whips come out, but you don't see the lightning. In this case, we see the lightning and the bit of Black Whip, which means that he'll be able to actually utilize his strength plus the whip, which should give him not only like combat options, like as far as grabbing people, pulling them, and actually being able to lift them and do something with it, but also it further enhances his mobility options so that he doesn't just have to rely on motions like from Bakugo. And we've already seen that because of the dance training that he got with Mina, that his spatial awareness and physical awareness in the air is actually pretty on point, as was showcased in the Culture Festival. So none of these arcs are useless. That's all I can tell you, is that they are all building up towards like Deku's combat ability, and so the ability to pivot mid-air, grab something, pull yourself, and constantly make these readjustments now gives him, you know, like genuine mobility for in the air, where he doesn't just have to rely on fighting somebody like Gentle, who creates like air pockets or anything like that. Now, All Might's condition is worsened, and it's either for comedic effect or All Might is actually just getting more and more sickly. I think it's a little bit of both. But we see that he's compiling a list of notes and essentially writing, it says Hero History on the cover. It actually says Hero History, Fight Campus, Notes for Midoriya, for Successors of Quirks. And so the idea of this for this book is essentially that I think All Might's trying to take all of his combat experience, as much of his fights as he remembers, and compile this all. He's building up towards leaving what he has to for Deku, because the reality is this: is that it was stated during the overhaul arc that Night Eye and All Might stopped working together after the fight with All For One. The fight with All For One took place 5 years before Deku met All Might. Okay, so Deku met All Might at minimum 10 months. So we're gonna have to say like 10 and a half months before the first day of school. This would mean that, well, actually, no, 10 months before 10 and a half months at least before the exam to get into UA. And then there's like probably like a 2-month buffer before like the school actually accepts or rejects you. So basically, when Deku met him, he was already on a timer. His death was predicted by Night Eye to be 5 to 6 years in the future. So the fact that we made it there and that we're at that 5-year mark already, at the end of this school year, we're close to the 6 years mark. This is the time period in which All Might's death should be approaching. 5 to 6 years, that margin, he's kind of pushed it to the limits. He almost died fighting All For One. Shigaraki's gotten a massive buff. He's gotten a massive influence. He's gotten massive forces. It's kind of time. The first school year's ending. I've always said that I don't think Deku needs All Might to be there for his second year. In fact, I think that having the first year be the one with All Might, the second year be the one where he starts to, when things are going wrong, All Might's dead, and he's really having a struggle, and then for like the third year, essentially, of the story, to be as he's like finally like rebounding and catching up and like coming up, and the come up of his to success. Granted, that's assuming that like Hero Society is still structured. I know like some people believe that All Might has to see him win a sports festival, and I think that part of this story's narrative is that sometimes your dreams go unfulfilled, and All Might not getting to see that kind of doesn't matter, because he'll still be a vestige, and so to a certain degree, All Might will still get to see him win and be there for him. Might even get to see like the father-son Detroit Smash or something. Not the same as in the movie, which was phenomenal, but like with the idea of like All Might, you know, when you think back to like the first opening when he's throwing the punch and it's cutting back and forth, something like that maybe, where for a brief moment you can see like All Might's fist image overlaid over Deku's as he's like taking somebody out, and it's like he's, you know, thinking back to All Might and how far he's come. But the main thing that I'm excited for is that we get confirmation that we're doing another round of work studies. And what I think is especially important here is that when he says the next round of work studies, Bakugo, Shoto, and Deku are all in that box. I think we're finally getting a villain-centered arc that will actually utilize all three of these characters. And the reason why I say like heavily utilizes all three of them and actually focuses on a narrative about their growth. Now, what I mean by that is that during the sports festival, since the sports festival, we haven't really had an arc that was that dedicated to these three. So like the training camp arc, yes, they wanted to save Bakugo, but that was mostly about like Deku's fight, Deku's like progression, reaching Koda, and then saving Bakugo as an objective, and Bakugo was a focus, but Shoto was mostly there for his power. As far as the narrative was concerned, it wasn't necessarily about what he felt or thought. And even going forward into the Kamino Ward arc, yes, Shoto was there to go to save, but that was, again, moreover, him narratively being there to make sure that they could guarantee, using heaven-piercing ice wall, that they would be able to rescue Bakugo. Whereas it was actually about, like, Midoriya making that choice, whereas that's why it was only Midoriya, it was, like, from Ida to Midoriya, not from Ida to Midoriya and Shoto. Shoto wasn't, like, as prominent of a focus during those arcs. And so as you move forward though, like we kind of had the joint training arc where like the three of them were like getting their shine, but I think narratively it was more like, here, Bakugo's doing well, here's a weakness for Shoto, here's progression for Deku, and here's something that like Deku's narrative is going to be forward. So this is an arc, and like when you get to the overhaul arc, they're completely disregarded, Shoto and Bakugo. You get to the remedial course arc, no Deku. Pro Hero arc, obviously no. Culture Festival, Shoto and like is in the beginning kind of applies, but that one again, Shoto and Bakugo kind of take a back seat. even with like Bakugo playing the music. But other than that, that was like to emphasize him working with them, which was just foreshadowing for what was to come within the joint training arc, but not necessarily that being the crux of the narrative of that arc. And so this arc is finally an arc that's going to more than likely center around villains, center around doing work studies, them handling some kind of case. I do expect there's a very strong chance All Might is dying this arc. On Twitter, I said it kind of as a joke, but I'm also being kind of serious that there's a chance that the last chapter this year could be the death of All Might, and then we could just be stuck on a 2-week break waiting to see what comes next. I kind of want Hody to take that risk just because I could, one, we'd be living in a world where Twitter would be very upset that the MHA stands couldn't shut up, because if All Might dies here, if All Might dies within the next 10-15 chapters, we've got the rest of September, October, November. We're gonna end up taking like 2 breaks in December. We've got about 10-12 chapters left this year, I want to say. I could probably pull up the schedule, but I'm not gonna do that. Actually, no, I would say 12 to 14 chapters is probably where we're at. And depending on the direction, the speed of which they want to take these work studies, especially considering the fact that we have the Giga Jump crossover also with the team ups, we could see it accelerate very quickly into something that just is, one, literary wise actually conceivable, but 2, justifies All Might's death. Keep in mind that the Pro Hero arc set up a bunch and had one of the craziest events in the series and set all those events in motion within the span of 8 chapters. So the idea that within these next 14, Horikoshi could potentially get us to a point where All Might dying would make sense and be a part of this internship or work studies arc, while having these students deal with the death of All Might while completing these work studies, and then eventually going from there and seeing how that affects UA, whether they get shut down. One of the things that I was thinking about recently is, what if UA got shut down and the students ended up transferring to Shiketsu, and we still got a sports festival, but they're at Shiketsu now, so it's a completely different like format and different like teaching experience, and that would be a way to twist the series where it wouldn't just be about UA, but also any of the school related stuff would actually be considerably different due to the militaristic nature of Shiketsu. Plus, then we could get the aerial battle that you never thought about of Bakugo versus Inasa, and that would be kind of fun. So that's those are my thoughts. This was a transition chapter, and transition chapters are usually not the deepest and heaviest chapters. The only time I would argue against that in this series would have been when we got the dream sequence between All for One and One for All, going back to the first user. But as a general rule, you don't usually put too much in your transition chapters. You usually give enough to make people interested. This one's focused more around character dynamics and humor, but did in fact give me some things to talk about and speculate upon. If you guys enjoyed my video, leave likes, share, subscribe. You know how YouTube works. You gotta subscribe and do all the other things for the algorithm to make the video and the channel grow. If you don't want the channel to grow and you like the small community, I guess that's fair. As always, you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Anaki out.